Hi everyone, it's Gabrielle Bertrand here to give my thesis pitch for my writing intensive class. Um, Sharing my screen, hopefully you all should be able to see me. Okay, so hopefully you all can see me and hear me. Okay, so this is my thesis pitch presentation. I first want to introduce to you all my single story, which is the story that there are only two genders slash sexes. This single story encompasses like four underlying beliefs. First is the belief in the gender binary, which essentially means that a person can only be a man or a woman. The belief in only two biological sexes, male or female. The belief that the gender and sex are the same thing, and also the belief that to be a man or a woman is not subjective and is instead determined at birth. So there are some flaws in the single story. The biggest one is that it pretty much excludes everyone who exists outside of that single story from many aspects of society, such as transgender people here and non-binary and intersex people. For this presentation, I'm going to consider non-binary genderqueer people to be transgender people. So that's how I'll be referring to them. So pretty much the question is, who is questioning this single story? Well, one, obviously the people who are not in the single story, but a really important one to notice is Western academia. Academics, specifically German psychologists, started studying the phenomenon that we would now consider transgenderism all the way back in the early 1900s. In addition, people whose minority sexual orientation, such as lesbians, gays, bisexuals, etc., have also always kind of been questioning the single story because very often the gender roles associated with the single story tend to really reinforce heterosexuality, which is when you're not heterosexual, you're going to start kind of questioning everything, just kind of questioning the single story that you've been taught your whole life. There are many ways that the single story can be changed. I'd like to really focus on more legal, economic, social, and medical awareness and acceptance of transgender and intersex people. Throughout this presentation, I'll be kind of discussing why the single story persists, and I believe it is because it's pretty fundamental to our society. Traditional gender roles, restricted behavior and choices of men, women, non-binary people. It affects all of our interactions, mostly because gender stereotypes, pretty much we're encouraged to use gender stereotypes to kind of make assumptions about each other, even when they're not really true. So a really great quote here I found from this academic journal about different generations of genderqueer people is this line, that those whose bodies and identity documents do not align as expected by the larger society are rendered unintelligible by social structures that privilege binary and cisgender experiences. So essentially a really good example of this is the institution of pretty much like gender different bathrooms. So essentially that you're a woman, you have your bathroom, or you're a man, you have this bathroom. But once if you're not really like a cisgender woman or a cisgender man, like what are you gonna do? As this one person in front of the door is like showing that like if they go into the women's room, they're gonna get yelled at and be like, you're not a woman, get out of the women's bathroom. But if you go into the guy's bathroom, you're more likely to maybe face some homophobia or transphobia and have a violent and be the victim of a violent response to that. So some observations and explanations for what I found in my research is that the American economy really reinforces this single story through the marketing, selling, and social encouragement of purchasing specifically gendered products. Some ones I'd like to point out are like self-care products such as like razors, shampoos, and earplugs, as I have right here in my presentation, because it shows that it's like these same like earplugs, just like different names, like extreme heroes earplugs, for like kind of like it's very obvious for like the guys like using like the superhero. It's like a method to encourage it. And something that's also else is that how like the buying of specifically gendered products for young children and babies really kind of starts putting gender stereotypes on these kids very early before they can even mentally comprehend the idea of gender. And the cake I have here is for a gender reveal party, and it's kind of already enforcing like ideas about like gender on these kids before they're even like born, about how like touchdowns, if you're a boy you like to play like a sport, tutus or a girl you'd like to perform, but like as we all know there are like women like sports and like men who like performing and non-binary people who like doing both. So it's like, you know, another observation I want to talk about is how the single story is maintained because it brings stability, comfort, these perceptions of society. And essentially, it's how what I noticed in my research is that when the gendered expectations of Americans are not met, those who deviate are marginalized, which really increases the chance of violence against them. Something that has been a trend that we've noted on that the LGBT has commented upon before is how often transgender people are murdered every year, usually because they're often like usually because their transgender identities often intersect with other marginalized identities, such as being a woman of color or being a sex worker, what makes their lives more dangerous. I mean, some of the people who have been murdered, like in this photo, have been like were part of like hate crimes, but some of them were just like pretty much already in marginalized situations, and it's just really sad because of there's like this is only from like August, and before then like already 26 transgender people have died, and it's really sad because like no one should be like no one should get murdered obviously, but it's like it's really sad this really marginalized group of people keeps on getting murdered. And something I want to show you a video is about essentially something I noticed in my research is about how Americans are really afraid of people who deviate from the single story and will assume they will try to harm them. After this, I'm going to play you a pretty transphobic video that was a political advertisement played during the 2018 midterms. It was on this question 3, which was a Massachusetts referendum on whether to retain a 2016 state law that prohibited that protected transgender people from discrimination in public spaces. This video is from an organization called Keep Massachusetts Safe, which really opposed the law. And I'm going to show you this really horrible video. Let's see if it works.
What does Massachusetts question 3 mean to you? It means any man who says he is a woman can enter a woman's locker room, dressing room, or bathroom at any time, even convicted sex offenders. And if you see something suspicious and say something to authorities, you could be the one arrested.
Well, like one, like if you don't know anything about like the bathroom bill issue, you're gonna be freaking terrified seeing that like ad. Like I was scared, even though I know that it's like completely insane because transgender women are women, and like we just change in the locker room like freaking normal people. And it's just very much that when a lot of people are ignorant about the single story, they can very much be told like, oh, this group of people that you don't know about, they're going to try and hurt you. And if you don't know better, you're just going to agree it. And it's very obvious that people who, when the information is readily available, that shows like, hey, these people are just like normal people. What are you doing? That people will choose to ignore it, that information, in order to keep their own personal opinions and biases. Another observation, and I've observed in my research, is that due to the public's pretty conservative view of what is considered healthy regarding mental health or physical health, transgender and intersex people are often considered to be wrong in some way. Like they're viewed as kind of wrong in like medicine, and thus these inaccurate perceptions prevent them from making their own medical decisions. Some really big examples of this are that intersex people often have non-consensual surgeries performed on them as children. I was also going through this whole presentation. If you don't know what being intersex is, an older word for it would be hermaphrodism, which is like not a good word to use. No, it's pretty rude, but pretty much saying that like your biological sex can't really be easily classified into male or female because you either have like certain traits that are both. So yeah, so a lot of times intersex people, when they're like babies or when they're like 5 years old or very young, they'll get these surgeries performed on them that their parents will make the decision for, that they have no choice in, that can pretty much like change like parts of like pretty like close, intimate parts of their body in order to correct their biological sex to be more involved in the binary. And very often these people are not aware of what happens to them until they are adults, and they cannot really do much about it. Um, and a lot of times when they're growing up, and a lot of times this lack of education in school and society, a lot of times intersex people grow up feeling like their bodies are disgusting because they do not match the biological sex binary, which is awful because no one should hate their body for like anything, for like something they can't, especially for something they can't control. Another way about how the public kind of views health is that very often transgender people are kind of considered to be mentally ill for being transgender, and how parents of transgender children are sometimes accused of child abuse for letting their children transition at a young age. This is really, I noticed this from researching Jazz Jennings. She's a trans woman who is a young trans woman who is a transgender rights activist and whose life has been pretty much documented as she's like grown up as a trans woman, and how a lot of times her parents were accused of like abusing her, even though like she made all her own decisions regarding her own gender. Another observation I observed is that this single story was historically reinforced in American law and governance. In the 20th century, the police pretty much enforced these unofficial anti-cross-dressing laws against the LGBT community across the United States, and they would just pretty much arrest LGBT people for not conforming to gender like standards. As I mentioned before, like to perform these non-consensual surgeries on intersex children is still legal in the US. And as mentioned before, these bathroom bills were introduced in the US and recently have been continuously introduced in different states. But this legislative practice was only made illegal last year in 2019. So a lot of people really did not want transgender people to use the bathroom assigned with their gender. Don't really know why. It's not that big of a deal. And how, since I was talking about like pretty recent events, the single story, unsurprisingly, is still reinforced in American law and governance today. Many state laws lack direct civil rights protections for transgender people, even though we had a really great win in how Title IX now protects transgender people and like LGBT people. That's really great. A lot of states still don't have direct civil rights protections. So that means that if you do have an issue, you'd have to go to the federal level instead of like the states, which might be a bit easier. There's also little federal recognition of non-binary genders. On most states, there's only the M/F options on state IDs. Transgender, from what I've read of like personal like stories and accounts of transgender people through my research, transgender people often face public harassment for their expression. And transgender people live at an economic disadvantage compared to their cisgender peers. Cisgender just means not transgender. So like I would be cisgender because I was born female, and then I grew up and I realized I'm a girl, and that would make me cisgender because my gender and sex are like usually kind of like by society considered to be aligned. Among LGBT people, transgender people have the highest rates of poverty at 29.4%, meaning that almost 30% of transgender people live in poverty, which is really sad. So how's the current conversation going regarding this single story? It's going decent. I mean, like very often, transgender intersex people have been acknowledged and studied by academic institutions for over a century, even though some decent amount of improvements really do need to be made about how transgender intersex people deal with their own health and are respected by medical professionals. The majority of popular news oriented publications do fully acknowledge transgender and intersex people and use their preferred pronouns and related stories. And respectful depictions of transgender and intersex people in media is becoming more common in movies, TV shows, and books. However, conservative-leaning popular publications such as Fox News have published some opinion pieces in the last couple of years that endorse this single story and ignorantly conflate gender and sex to the point of almost like obscuring like the other side's argument, but almost to the point of obscuring like the truth is how almost half the population understands it. So I'm going to show you an example of the current conversation with my favorite raging bigot, Tucker Carlson. If you, yeah. So essentially, no one told this man that gender is a social construct and he cannot process it. Oh, let me go back to that. I'm trying to raise the volume for it. It should work. No, go back. Sorry. Just having some technical difficulties here. It's not a change, Tucker. It's always been that way. Yes. I'd love to be a baby something. I'm part of the Gender Elimination Coalition. They've existed for 100 years, Tucker. At least. Oh my God. I guess major technical difficulty. I did not know that happened. I really don't want to have to redo this whole thing. So I'm just gonna, hopefully this should be back on track. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. Come on.
Well, for all of our lives, we've lived in a world of boys and girls, but that is changing along with everything else. In 2017, in Canada, directly to our north, the parents of the baby successfully petitioned to have that child.
Oh my God. Oh, no, not again. It's just kind of annoying. But we still need to accommodate for them, Tucker. If they exist, we acknowledge them. Yeah, but yes. So Oh, good. Finally got to skip. Okay. So yeah. Those are some thoughts. Yeah. But I do feel like that's a pretty good explanation of like the current conversation, because I mean I might be like I'm kind of being a bit hoity-toity, because I've never really had to grow up with this single story. It was like I was pretty much taught in health class in high school that like, oh, gender and sex are two different things. Like, like you talk to the doctor about like isn't really your feelings, it's about your body. So it's a bit like interesting, kind of like this, you can see like the cognitive distance, like the cognitive dissonance of like having to deconstruct this idea of like gender and sex aren't the same thing, and to change one's gender to change one's sex is like no, it's not how it works. um it's a different process, and it's just kind of interesting to kind of show that um like how are we going to address that, like how are we going to deconstruct the single story. um and my thesis hopes to address that. While the majority of Americans believe there are only two genders and consider gender and sex to be the same thing, the very existence of transgender and intersex people, which Western academia has acknowledged and studied for over a century, disproves a single story. This single story continues to persist among the American public because it is perpetuated by our legal system, gender-based marketing, strict social constructs, and the public's understanding of health. The American government should reject this single story through federally recognizing non-binary genders and intersex peoples in law and social programs to improve their livelihoods through better economic, medical, and social inclusion. These government changes would send the message to older Americans, as well as other institutions, that transgender and intersex people deserve equal rights and fair treatment in all areas of life. Well, why does my thesis matter? Well, my thesis matters is because transgender and intersex people are real, they exist, and they're marginalized because they do not conform to society's limited binary concepts of biological sex and gender. This thesis is an argument for a method of how activists can address the issues that transgender and intersex people face due to this single story to increase their inclusion and acceptance in broader American society. So I just want to show a little like sign I found about kind of like the solidarity between transgender and intersex people is that bodily autonomy is a human right. And I also want to share something that I found to be funny, but maybe not everyone will find it funny, because it reminded me of a bit of like Tucker Carlson's like doom, like if we destroy this single story, the world will fall to pieces and we'll all be like the world will crumble. And I feel like that's a bit of an overreaction. I feel that like yes, our social institutions will fundamentally change if we do acknowledge that the single story is not true. However, hopefully it'll be for the best. Imagine if you could just do something that's normally not associated with your gender and no one criticizes you for it. Like that'd be great. So I'm going to show you something I found kind of funny. This is the sign usually associated with the transgender community or sometimes the intersex community, and it's this is the age of sin, reject the order of creation, revel in the annihilation of man and as the image of God, destroy plot designs of death, disfigure the face of man and woman. And hopefully, as I did my makeup for this video, I did not disfigure the face of women, because I think I did nice on this makeup. Yes, destroy plot designs of death for this single story as I will crusade on. Thank you. Hopefully this wasn't too boring and you guys had a nice time with me. Thank you. Bye.